So there you go. So why don't you pick up wherever you want to pick up, and we'll begin again, or cover whatever you want to cover.
Sure. Maybe I'll repeat some of the questions because the connection was really bad. Yeah. My apologies about that.
Not a problem.
Yeah, so we started from the congressional address, right? And you said he basically repeated his main message during the campaigns, law and order, and he put he underlined oversee radical Islamic terrorism as a main threat to the homeland security. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Right. And then I asked you about your opinion on his national security policy, and you said you're not in favor of it. Most of it are mistaken. And then it rejects 50 years of American leadership in the world.
Right.
Yeah, right. And I want to hear your comments more on his maybe immigration policy and homeland security policies. Feel free to go into the details, like the mass deportation. You said it's not very practical, right?
Right. Mass deportation is not very practical, and it's cruel. I'm all for enforcing our laws, but we're simply not going to deport 11 million people. Building a wall between the United States and Mexico will alienate one of our closest neighbor and one of our two closest neighbors, and for no real good reason. Our ban on Muslims is counter to American law, which prohibits us from making distinctions based upon religion,
Right.
And is poorly thought out because the 7 countries he's identified are not really where the threat is coming from. You might as well say ban people from Mongolia.
Right. On the mass deportations, you said it's not practical. Is it because it's too many people, like 11 million, so it's impossible to identify everyone, and it will be very costly? What are the reasons behind this?
It costs too much. There's too many people. It would require diverting all of our resources from fighting real crime. It is not well addressed to a significant problem. It's immoral. I mean, it would require us to gather up 11 million people and send them away, which in concentration camps. It's kind of like, concentration camps in Germany, or what America did to the Japanese in World War II, or the Cultural Revolution in China. All of these things are areas that people don't remember fondly because they involve very authoritarian, aggressive governmental activity that we should not repeat.
Right. But recent days, Trump has become a little more presidential as well. Like he kind of hinted that he would like to create a pathway for undocumented immigrants to become legal American citizens. Did you notice that?
I did notice that. I don't believe it, but if he actually does it, that would be a smart change in policy. I think I would support that, if that were the case, and that would be something that I would agree with, at least in part. We'd have to see the details, of course, but I just honestly I don't believe him. Right?
You just don't trust him as a leader.
Well, he says lots of things and that he doesn't actually do, right? And so we'll see. Maybe this is one of the things he will actually do, and that will be good. But
right. He also maintains.
You gotta wait, right?
He also maintains the DACA program for now, right?
So far, yes. But if you look at the enforcement memos from DHS, he also says he eliminates all of the enforcement priorities and says it doesn't matter. We're not going to focus on just criminal aliens. We're going to focus on everybody. So, DACA for now is maintained. Whether it's maintained for much longer, we'll see. In America, there's a great old movie called Jerry Maguire, in which the guy says, "Show me the money, right? Show me reality." This is a presidency where we have to say, "Show me the money."
Oh, yeah. But he claims that he is already carrying out a lot of his promises in the campaign.
Yes, he claims that.
Well, we'll have to wait and see, right? Yeah.
All of his policies have been declared, but none have been implemented yet. The travel ban was stopped by the courts. Deportations haven't really begun. The wall hasn't started. We haven't withdrawn from NATO. We haven't, everything that he says he's going to do, he hasn't actually done yet. He's just really said, again, I'm going to do it. Maybe he will. We'll see.
I'm wondering, when you work in the DHS, how does the agency deal with undocumented immigrants? There must be some deportation, right? Usually,
sure.
What's the average number every year?
Well, there's an entire department devoted to it. ICE is an Immigration and Customs enforcement, right?
Right.
The actual number of deportations, it actually sort of depends on what you mean, because most of the deportations are of people who just arrived, right? So they're right at the border. Last year, and last year there were about 250,000 people removed in the whole country. But of that, probably only about 60 or 70,000 were for interior. Actually, 65,000 were for interior removals.
So
that is people who are living here in the United States, inside the country.
Right. Usually, how does the DHS locate all these people? Like when I watch old Hollywood movies, I always see, they maybe go into restaurants suddenly and then, ask everyone for their ID. And then you see some people who are actually undocumented, and DHS will,
That's very rare. It was much rarer under President Obama. They may do more of that under President Trump. Mostly, however, the people who are removed from the interior are illegal aliens who have been caught and prosecuted for some other crime. So somebody inside the country commits a murder. They go to jail, and then when their jail sentence is over, they're removed and sent back to their country. Drugs is very common, right? There are not a lot of undocumented alien worker raids inside the country. In fact, last year, and this could change under President Trump, but last year, about 95% of the people who were deported who had no criminal conviction were people who were deported from at or near the border and ports of entry. So they just arrived. So that means that only 5% of the people who were deported who had no criminal convictions were people who were caught up somewhere inside the country for some reason.
So would you say that Trump intends to deport more people without a criminal background, and maybe not just those who just arrived at the border, but more from inside the U.S.?
Well, that's certainly what he has said. Whether or not he does it, again, we've talked about this, but that is the announced policy is more removals of people who are non-criminals, illegally present aliens. That is only the people whose only offense is being here illegally, which is itself a misdemeanor crime. But so strictly speaking, they're not completely without criminality, right?
Right. So we can clearly see the limits of DHS, carrying out his method planned here, right? Like the mass deportation, maybe it's much easier said than done.
Yes, I think that's right. I think most of it will also require a large number of resources. People who are inside the United States typically get judicial hearings, right? As opposed to people outside the United States who are at the border who can be summarily returned without a hearing. If you're in here for a while, you get to go in front of a judge. The average wait time right now for enforcement actions in immigration is, I think I read it's 700 days. So it's almost 2 years.
Wow.
So we need more judges too. And then, of course, the last piece is you can't send somebody back if the country that you're sending them to won't take them. China is a very good example. Historically, it has refused to receive back Chinese persons caught in the United States.
Okay.
And so you can't send them to no place. You have to send them to some place that's actual and real.
What are the reasons for countries like China to reject? Because they don't want this, like, maybe troublemaker in their mind?
Well, I mean, you'd have to ask the Chinese their reasons. Frankly, I mean, some of it is about they don't want criminals and troublemakers. If we're deporting Chinese persons who've been convicted of murder here in the United States, do you want a murderer back in China? Maybe not. A large fraction of it, in China's case, I think, is simply expressions of their own independence and sovereignty. They won't be, it's a way of standing up to the United States in an area. At least that was my experience in the past. I mean, they kind of, some of it is they say, well, he doesn't have, a Chinese person comes to the United States, destroys his Chinese passport. So they say, well, he's maybe not a real Chinese person. Maybe he's, maybe he's from Taiwan or Hong Kong. And they know that's not true, and we know that's not true, but that's what they say because they don't really mean it.
I see what you mean. Yeah. So if we just imagined Trump kind of pushes this mass deportation policy, maybe not in the scale of 11 million people, but millions of people, what are the likely backlash on that?
Well, I mean, again, it'll have both foreign and domestic consequences. Even if you deport 3 million people, you have to find places to send them. Mexico has already said it won't accept anybody other than Mexicans. So all of the Guatemalans, Hondurans, El Salvadorans, you have to get those countries to accept them, and you have to fly them home because Mexico won't let them on their land. And that's just nearby. Of course, you have to fly everybody back to Africa and Asia. Illegal persons from Malaysia or Indonesia have to be flown home. Right. Those countries have to accept them. So there's huge foreign complications. There's huge domestic complications in terms of cost because you just need thousands of more agents and hundreds of more judges. Then there's the political cost, which is that it's going to obviously energize and change America's politics some. There are many people in America who support the deportations, but there are many who don't. And this will lead to a big political fight. It will be, I've always heard that the Chinese have a curse that in translated is "May you live in interesting times."
Right.
because they like calmness and certitude. We in the United States are living in interesting times.
Certainly. Right. On building the wall, you said you're not in favor of it, and it will worsen the relationship between U.S. and Mexico. What are the more practical ways to secure the southern border then?
Well, I mean, there are lots of virtual wall things you can do, sensors and cameras and things that aren't a wall. So you can do that. But the main way to, secure the southern border is to reduce the interest of people in coming through the border, which means improving Mexico's economy and making sure that people have jobs. I mean, frankly, Another way would be to kind of regularize it, have temporary worker programs, so that people from Mexico or Guatemala could come through, work here for a while, and then go home without being afraid of not being able to come back and work next year. We use a lot of labor in the agricultural industry, in the tourist industry, in the hospitality industry, as you alluded to. It seems to me that we can and should legalize some of that, and therefore regularize it so that it wasn't such a bad thing.
Right. And I think Trump supporters' argument would be, the cameras would not actually stop people coming in. And, it takes a lot of time to reduce the interest by improving Mexican economy. And if you legalize the temporary work visa, it takes away American jobs. I mean, that's their counter argument.
Well, yeah, the counter argument about jobs is of course just factually wrong. There's almost no evidence that illegal immigrants take jobs that Americans actually want. As for whether cameras are more or less effective, I actually think they're likely to be more effective. You build a 10-foot wall, I'll buy an 11-foot ladder, right? You're going to have, even with a wall, you're going to have cameras to catch people who come across the wall. So the wall is except in, my experience at DHS and our experience at DHS was, the only place that walls are really useful are in very congested, urban areas, like where San Diego meets Tijuana, right?
Okay.
Or Brownsville, Texas meets Ciudad Juarez, because there you can't patrol and you can't watch all the people. But a wall in the middle of the Arizona desert, 50 miles from nowhere, isn't useful, any more useful than cameras.
I see. That's a good point. Yeah. When you don't have people to patrol, it's useless to have the wall because you can always get across it.
Exactly.
Right. On the Muslim travel ban, do you think there would be more dramatic changes to it? Like now it's not really implemented. What can Trump do if he really wants to push this forward?
I think that he's going to change it, restricted. His main mistakes in the first one were making it overtly Muslim-oriented and including people who have lawful permanent residence here in the United States, so-called green card holders.
Right.
If he changes both of those things, it's likely that they'll do much better in the courts the second time around.
So do you think it will get passed if he changes all that?
Well, nobody ever made any money predicting what courts will do, but I think it's much more likely that he'll be successful if he has a more limited order.
Yeah, but in your opinion, what will be the likely effect for such a ban, to protect the country, to stop terrorists coming in?
Oh, it's meaningless. It's symbolism, right? As I said, I don't think that the 7 countries he wants to ban people from are really the source of any threats. That's what the DHS report said just the other day. So even if he succeeds in doing it, it won't in practice actually make America any safer.
Yeah. I feel like it's just a ban on Iranian to show to the Israeli that we are doing something, while the other 6 countries are not really very relevant.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that's certainly possible. I actually had not thought about that till you mentioned it, that it was really all about Iran.
Right.
So I can't really say, but that's certainly a plausible.
Well,
right?
What will be your policy recommendations if you want to strengthen the national security regarding stopping terrorists coming in?
I think we've implemented most of the good identification systems. Better passports, more information sharing with foreign governments, more coordination in counterterrorism intelligence sharing. Again, in terms of identifying terrorist plots before they stop. Some focus on internal American threats, since roughly 85% of the terrorist attacks that have happened have been from inside the United States since 9/11, have been by people who were already here, mostly legally. So, that's, you can't really change that too much. If you're really serious about it, you do things like convince the Saudis to stop funding Wahhabi education centers. They won't, but that's really where we want to go.
And they're not even on the 7 countries list.
Right, of course not. Even though the 19 terrorists, 12 of them or something came from Saudi Arabia, right? So.
Right. I'm just imagining if the terrorist holds a passport of the 7 countries, one of the 7 countries, maybe he or she could also easily get a fake passport of another country and then just come.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to strengthen passport issuance, so that it is much harder today to get a fake passport than it was 10 years ago. And there's plenty of things to do to make it even harder still, but realistically, that's becoming much more difficult.
I see.
Right?
Right. I noticed that you were interviewed by the Daily Beast several months ago, and you mentioned that you were not sure whether the Trump administration can find people who actually run the national security agencies, right? He might find people for the top spots, but then at the deputy level, maybe a lot of people are not willing to work for him, or they criticized Trump before and Trump would not be willing to use them. What's your observation right now?
I think it's this. I don't think my opinion's changed. He's had a great deal of difficulty finding deputies. There's no deputy at the Department of State. He rejected the Secretary of State's proposal, a man named Elliot Abrams, precisely because Abrams had been critical of him earlier. So that's exactly what I predicted. There's no the deputy at the Department of Defense is a holdover from President Obama because they haven't actually had a replacement yet. They've had a nomination at the Department of Homeland Security, but that person hasn't been confirmed yet, and nobody has been nominated for any of the undersecretaries or assistant secretaries at DHS at all.
So who needs to confirm
so we're
this?
seeing exactly what I predicted come relatively true.
So the nomination requires a confirmation from Trump, the president himself, or what's the process?
The nomination comes from the president. The confirmation comes from the Senate.
So even on deputy level, one
all
needs
the way
to
down
go through.
to most assistant secretaries. There are about 600 to 700 Senate confirmed positions that need to be filled, and so far President Trump has filled 20, maybe 30.
Wow. Is this taking a much longer time than, let's say, the previous administrations?
It is, by all measures, and some of that is because of the Democrats in Congress who are trying to make it as hard as possible.
Right.
But some of that is also because the president hasn't made a lot of nominations, right, to deputy and assistant levels. So it's a combination of factors, to be fair. It isn't just the president's fault.
So what are the reasons behind it? You analyze.
Well, some of it is that he can't find people who want to work for him. Some of it is that he has a very slow decision-making process. Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, was supposed to be in charge of helping find these people, but he had his own problems coming and then leaving. So maybe it'll get better under Mr. McMaster. And then there's the Senate Democrats who have been making this go as slow as is humanly possible in order to make it very painful for President Trump. And they too are delaying things. So, so all of those are contributing.
Right.
It's not just one person.
What do you think about the pick of McMaster? Well, people
Oh,
react pretty positive to it.
yeah, no, I've met him. He's brilliant and excellent. If he is allowed to do the job, he will be fantastic.
Wow, could you elaborate a little bit?
He's an innovative thinker. He is not a yes man. He has a PhD in military history. He's willing to think outside the box. He's a leader that people follow. He's the real deal.
Would you be able to tell me a little about interactions between you and him?
No, that's
No.
not that. But I've met him. He's a great guy. I haven't met him a lot.
Okay, right. I was looking at his reading list. So he is a scholar on military history, right? And
Right.
that he once recommend some must-read books to military-related people. And I was surprised that he didn't list a book about China. He lists a lot of classics in the field, but not much on, let's say, cybersecurity or contemporary threats, like maybe China or North Korea.
That's interesting. I hadn't noticed that. I would say, first off, I think I saw that, yes, like Sun Tzu was on the list, right? So it's not like he's completely ignoring China. But,
No, Sun Tzu was not on the list. No.
Sun Tzu was not on the list?
No, not on the list.
Well, that's probably because everybody's read it. He doesn't need to yet tell everybody. That's interesting.
I could send you the link later. You can take a look
Well,
at it.
please do. I'd be interested. But, I tend to think that McMaster's list kind of reflects what he's been interested in and had to be engaged in. His career has not involved much cybersecurity, and it hasn't involved much China. He's mostly been in the Middle East, so that's where his focus is. But that's really fascinating. Send me the list. I may write something about that. That's really good.
Okay, I would appreciate if you can give me some comments on the book list as well. Maybe later in the email.
Possibly, though I won't have anything much to say until, because I probably won't know much of it.
All right. Yeah. That's an interesting observation that you find out not so many deputy or assistant secretary posts are filled. I'm surprised not so many media report on that yet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Even
I'm sure they will.
and also on the Asia policy, like I talked to some think tank scholars recently, and they were like, "Oh, there's not much update to it. We can't see anything because he doesn't have any Asia hands in the team yet." So
yeah,
people are all confused.
It's taking a long and slow time.
Right. What about on the pick of John Kelly as DHS secretary?
Also very good, very able. Not very experienced in homeland security issues, so he's going to need a deputy who knows the department very well. The secretary, they have picked one, Elaine Duke, who I've worked with, and she too is fantastic. So, he too is a good leader, right, and will understand what we need to do. I think that he's a good choice. Listen, I have to go in about 5 minutes to go to my next meeting. So
right.
There are a couple things more you want to ask before we leave?
Yes. I think a lot of Chinese are concerned that Trump's immigration policy will have an impact on the Chinese students studying in the U.S. and on the investment immigration, the program that you invest $1 million in the U.S. and you get the green card in the short term, right?
Yes. Well, I think they're right to be concerned. It is quite possible that those will be changed. I think the investment program probably won't be changed because when Trump's a businessman, right?
Yeah.
And when he talks about merit-based, he means success-based, and success-based would include things like a good business. I think that's unlikely. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the students. I hope nothing will happen. I think he's much more, to be honest with you, I think he's much more focused on Muslims because of the terrorist threat, and Latinos because he doesn't, because they are, quote, lower class, close quote. I think that China is not the focus of his immigration changes.
Okay, maybe on trade or foreign policy, he will punch on China more.
I think he's much more interested on trade with China, the whole China as currency manipulator thing. I mean, I don't really know trade very well. I just read about it, and then about things like South China Sea and China's role with North Korea and things like that. In fact, it's quite possible that as part of the negotiations with China, he may be easy on China with respect to immigration in exchange for help against North Korea, for example, or something like that.
On cybersecurity, a topic that you are very familiar with, on the Russian hackers, do you think the Congress should have just the intelligence committee to investigate it, or a bipartisan select committee?
I would prefer a bipartisan select committee. I'd also prefer an independent outside investigation, maybe through a special grand jury and a special counsel. I think the efforts by Russia to influence our election are deeply troubling, and that every American ought to want to know what actually happened.
Right, but now we can see the president actually prefers just the intelligence committee.
Of course he does.
Well, so how could the congressman to push forward a bipartisan select committee or the independent one?
It requires the leadership in Congress to agree to it, and they won't agree to it. So, that may be my preference, but I think the best that we're going to be able to do is have the intelligence committees and maybe the judiciary committees each look at pieces of it and see what happens. That's not optimal, but it's the best that we can come up with at this point.
Right. Well, one last question. As a former Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bush administration, you must know a lot of Republicans who are very devoted to this country, but they are reluctant to support Trump. At this moment, when Trump is already the president, what are people like you, Republicans, think about him, and what are your hopes for the country?
Well, that's a great question. I can only speak for myself. Many of my friends have thought that it's their duty to go in and try and help him do it right.
Yeah.
I personally think that President Trump is not somebody that I can support or will support, either publicly or by working for him. I wish him the very best. I hope he does the right thing. When he does the right thing, I will say so and applaud him. But my experience so far is that he mostly says the wrong thing and does the wrong thing. And when he says and does the wrong thing, I will oppose him. Right. That does not mean that I will be in favor of a Democratic president. I'm not, but I will not. I personally cannot and will not support a president whose policies are wrong and, frankly, whose personal conduct is so bad that I wouldn't want to be in the same room with him.
That's pretty depressing. Like, after 8 years, finally, a Republican comes to the White House, but then it's not the person you would support, and you have make the decision of not working for him.
Well, it is for me personally very depressing. I had very much valued service to my country, and I had very much wanted another opportunity to serve in another administration, Republican administration, perhaps at a higher level. I had been wanting to do that for the last 8 years, and I had hoped that this would be my chance.
Yeah.
When I was asked if I was interested in working for President Trump, I said no, and that's not going to change.
Among your friends who used to work for Bush, would you say a lot of them make the same choice?
It's about 50-50. Some of my friends have accepted positions, and I wish them well, and I hope they've made the right choice for them personally and for the country. Many others have said they cannot work for him, and they will not, and I respect their choice as well. I'm not going to criticize my friends for doing what they think is right. But for me personally, the answer is very easy. I can't work for him, and I won't.
I see. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you have a nice day. And I will definitely send you the link, and we can continue the discussion afterwards if you like.
I would love to see Mr. McMaster's reading list, and then if you write an article using this, I assume it will be in Chinese, so I can't read it. Yeah.
Yeah, it will be in Chinese, but nowadays Google Translate is pretty great. Sometimes I put in Google
Translate. Send me a link, please, and just so I know. Okay?
Yeah, I will certainly do so. Thank you so much for your time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.